An old Jewish joke. What's a Jewish telegram? It reads, "Start worrying, details to follow." The rabbi asked an elderly congregant if she saw a certain article in a Jewish magazine. "Oh, I don't subscribe to that anymore," she says. "Oh, so what magazine do you read?" asks the rabbi. "I read The Klansman," answers the elderly woman. "The Klansman," blurts out the rabbi. "That hate-filled, vile, no-good rag? How can you bear to have that filthy thing in your house?" "You should understand, Rabbi," says the lady. "I'm old, and pain keeps me up at night. When I read our Jewish magazines, they tell me that anti-Semitism is on the rise, that arguments about who is a Jew are tearing our people apart, and that the loss of our younger generation is accomplishing the decimation that Hitler, Yimach Shemo, wanted. Boy, I stay awake from worry. But when I pick up a copy of The Klansman and read that the Jews control all the media, and that their power is growing every year and banks' international finances are in their hands, I sleep like a baby." Last one, a favorite one of the Jewish psyche. A group of elderly Jewish men are gathered in a cafe in Tel Aviv. They drink their coffee, they discuss the world situation. Given the state of the world, their talks are usually dispiriting, depressing. One day, one of the men startles the others and announces, "You know what? I'm an optimist." The others are shocked. Then one of them smells something fishy. "If you're an optimist, why do you look so worried?" His friend replies, "You think it's easy to be an optimist?" This is a sermon about how to be a troubled optimist, about how to manage our natural fears and look to the future with a realistic hope. This year, 2014, we commemorate 100 years of living connected to the entire world. A century ago began the Great War, World War I. After 2 world wars, the Great Depression, the Holocaust, the threat of nuclear mutual destruction, we ended the 20th century with the light of the 1990s, with walls being torn down, age-old enmities ending from Russia to South Africa, to Northern Ireland to Israel and the emerging Palestinian state. How will history characterize this era? The global fight against terrorism, the Islamic State's meteoric rise from the chaos of Syria and Iraq, the chilling winds of a new Cold War, Israel's fight for existence and legitimacy, rising anti-Semitism, Iran's nuclear ambitions, and if that hasn't quickened your pulse, add climate change and the widest gap between the rich and the poor in this country since 1928. These real challenges in our world must be addressed with strategic action. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in his first inaugural address in 1933, stated what has become iconic: "We have nothing to fear but fear itself. Unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance." Roosevelt understood what psychologists were beginning to teach. Fear is a part of our body's natural fight, flight, freeze response. Our fears can lead us to unnecessary fights, irresponsible flights, and crippling freezes. We have to tame our fears and open our hearts toward trust in order to create possibilities of hope. As Jews, we know the path toward realistic hope, and we know the obstacles. Rabbi Zalman Shabtai Shalomi was a master teacher who passed from this earth this summer at age 89, having pioneered a spiritual renewal of Judaism. His insight was that not all fear is the same. In Hebrew, there are 3 different words for fear. The first is pachad, real terror, pachad. Think of the Hebrew words pochad, here, sharp danger. There are real things about which to worry. ISIS, Ebola, riots against Jews in the streets of Paris. There are real dangers that we need to guard against. The second word is ema, deep anxiety. This comes from the Hebrew words aye ma. Aye, where? Where is it? Ma, what is it? Where? Ema. I don't know what the danger is, but I'm afraid. This fear only appears in Torah when God allows Abraham to see into the future, and it was too much. A fear of great darkness, ema, fell upon him. Pachad is a danger that I know, ema is a danger that I don't know, but I'm still afraid. Think about some of our worries about anti-Semitism, about the way some of our politicians speak of global jihad, generalized fears that can cause great alarm and overreaction. The last fear is yirah, which comes from the Hebrew word sight. In Latin, it is spect, as in spectacles, or respect, to see again, causing awe. Picture a room. You're inside. Then you realize that you're not alone. You are seen. You are being noticed. This causes caution. The way a person acts on his or her own is different from when being noticed. That consciousness is awe, a healthy fear. The fear that we must fear, as Roosevelt says, is the middle one, ema, the unsettled, deep anxiety. The first, pachad, is about real dangers we must prevent. The last, yirah, is an appeal to our higher natures, the awe that comes from knowing that we are seen. At the mountaintop, after the angel stops him, Abraham sees the ram hidden in the thicket, a solution that blind passion obscured. And then Abraham names the place Adonai Yireh. God will see. Abraham is seen. Even at moments of horror, trust in the future is possible. And this trust gives us a sense of realistic hope. 2014 is not 1914, nor 1929, nor 1940, nor 2001. There are real dangers, some too familiar. But the past need not repeat itself in the same way. This summer, a few things became clear about being Jewish in our world. Whether we want to admit it or not, people are talking about us. Even if you want to see your Judaism as a faith or as a culture and nothing more, the reality of our world and our history is that we are a people. Our fate is inextricably bound to the lives of our fellow Jews around the world. Some of us feel this deeply, our responsibility to our people inculcated into us at an early age. For others, it came anew on a birthright trip or some other formative experience. 70% of Jews in America feel very or somewhat attached to Israel, including the younger generations, though not as intensively. Half of our small Jewish people now lives in Israel, about 6 million. What Israel does or does not do affects us. We are expected to respond about Israel's actions in school or in work or on Facebook. Many at Mount Sinai told me this summer about their exhaustion of correcting misinformation in print, video, or social media. All of a sudden, each of us was asked to be an expert. People are talking about us, about Israel, about Jews, and we're not immune to world opinion. In 2014, the conflict with Israel is more confusing than generations ago. How do you respond when your heart feels different things? Do you speak about the broader context of Israel's existence as a democracy in a sea of totalitarian and chaotic regimes? As the one place in the world where Jewish life is normalized, whereas Christians and Muslims have countries around the world where this is possible? Do you speak about Zionism as being misunderstood when it is equated with colonialism or oppression? That it truly reflects aspirations of that normalization, of safety, of renewal, of redemption, of being a light to the nations? Do you speak of the Arab-Israeli conflict or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? The first has Israel seem like David, the second like Goliath. Do you speak about how terrorism should never be justified, that negotiations are the only way to a solution? Do you speak about frustrations with settlement building that solve internal Israeli politics but undermine Israel's legitimacy in the world? Do you speak about weak Palestinian leadership that is bypassing Secretary of State Kerry's peace initiative by going straight to the United Nations? And do you speak about their pain of seeing the awful pictures from Gaza, and that our hearts are broken from that loss of life, and the loss of life of all Israelis and the many Palestinians? Whatever we choose to emphasize, our hearts are big enough, they are, to hold multiple truths, to care about Palestinians along with Israelis, and to be clear that when we say Israelis, we also mean the Muslims, Christians, and Druze, along with others who live with our Jews in the democratic state. Isaiah warned us thousands of years ago, Hoi ha'omrim l'ra tov v'latov ra, woe to them that call evil good and good evil. As the Gaza war unfolded this summer, it was clear that lies about Israel's intentions were repeated as truths. Complexities were ignored and context was not explained. Some criticisms of Israel were laced with an energy and a rhetoric that borrowed from anti-Semitic playbooks. In America, a slim majority of the Presbyterian Church USA, leadership of that church, approved a boycott of 3 companies doing business in the West Bank. This vote of this mainstream liberal denomination came after they distributed on their official website a report called Zionism Unsettled, a dangerous and revisionist tract, which blamed Israel for all of the violence in the region, ignoring much of history, focusing only on a narrow reading of the reality that Israel is a regional superpower, not the roles of the majority Arab states in the region, nor challenges in Palestinian leadership. And some within the Presbyterian Church behind this report and the vote said that the ideal outcome is the end of Israel as a Jewish state. They desire one state wherein a naive vision, all will live in peace. Unfortunately, the Middle East does not have a very good track record of different nationalities and religions living side by side within one state. The truth is that Israel as a Jewish state is an anomaly in the modern world. Zionism as a political movement was born in the 1800s after recognizing that the Jewish people were never truly accepted in Europe. In the year of the French Revolution, the Count of Clermont-Tonnerre spelled out the terms by which the Jews would be included in a new political order. The Jews, he said, should be denied everything as a people and granted everything as individuals. The history of Europe in the 1800s proved how false this idea would prove to be in practice, convincing even the most secular of Jews, such as Theodor Herzl, that a nation-state was a necessary reality for Jews' survival. As Israeli author Amos Oz now tells it, Europe used to say to the Jews, "Go to Palestine." Now it's, "Get out of Palestine." This is the historic predicament of our Jewish people. To be Jewish is to hold on to paradoxes, universalism and particularism, self-defense and self-critique. This uneasy balance causes us to speak at times more from eimah, deep anxiety, than true pachad, true fear. There's a parable told in the Talmud about how fears can destroy even the strong. The rabbis teach that in 5 instances of the weak can terrorize the strong, even though they shouldn't have that power. The mighty lion fears the net. The elephant fears the mosquito. The scorpion is tormented by the spider. The eagle by the swallow. And a large whale by a little fish. How could this be? The lion can be terrorized by the buzz of that gnat, even though it can do no harm. A mosquito can drive a huge elephant crazy, especially if it's flying around inside its trunk. The lowly spider can get into a scorpion's ear, the swallow under the wings of the eagle, preventing its flying high, and a large whale worries about a small fish going into its blowhole. The smaller creature can do harm, but at times our fear is larger than the bite. Israel is a regional superpower, but how can it not worry about falling prey to one of its adversaries that resort to terrorism? What threats are true pachad? What threats are overblown? Eimah. This summer, after Mount Zion's successful, meaningful Israel trip, I stayed in Jerusalem for 2 extra weeks to study at the Hartman Institute. On Thursday, July 11th, I was in the Old City. And then the air raid sirens wailed. And finding no shelter, I watched above me in the blue sky as Israel's defensive Iron Dome missile intercepted an Iranian missile that Hamas had shot from Gaza. I'll never forget that moment. Strangely, I didn't exactly feel fear, although my heart was beating quite quickly. My mind was more incredulous that this could really be happening, and even rationalized that the missile surely would not pass through the defenses because this was the Old City. The rockets were real threats. Even though Israel created with American financial support the defenses against them in the past few years. And so too were the tunnels real threats. According to a report at that time, the 30 reinforced concrete tunnels that Hamas dug into kibbutzim and other communities of southern Israel were meant to be used today on Rosh Hashanah for a massive terror plot involving 200 Hamas terrorists at once, entering kindergartens and dining halls at once. Some of our fears are not irrational. They are real and our pachad understandable. What happens in Israel affects Jews around the world. This July in the Netherlands, one of the chief rabbis had his house attacked 5 times. There were several anti-Israel rallies in The Hague that featured chants about killing Jews. Similar calls were heard at a rally in Belgium, where the community is still reeling from the slaying in May of 4 people at Brussels Jewish Museum. And Jews in Belgium were also denied professional services in at least 3 documented instances, including one case of a doctor who advised his 90-year-old Jewish female patient from Antwerp to go seek help in Gaza. And just yesterday, I heard from a friend of mine, a rabbi who is in Mississippi, that he went to a restaurant and was told whether, when he wanted to order a drink, he was asked, "Do you want the large size or the Jewish size?" He sort of stared back, couldn't quite believe he had heard this, and said, "Huh? What do you mean?" And he goes, "Oh, you're not Jewish, are you?" And he said, "Yes, I am Jewish." He said, "Well, then get out of my restaurant." Now, God willing, a weird freak incident, but this is 2014. And what did he mean? This summer, according to the president of the French Jewish community, it was a time of fear, which we shared with our Israeli brethren. There was a mounting sense that public authorities could no longer be relied on to provide the community with protection. Here in America, we did not see the same level of animosity as in Europe, but several faith groups have moved toward unabashed anti-Zionist positions, pro-boycott positions that are one-sided and counterproductive, straining some interfaith relations. And even with the Christian right among Christian Zionists, a crack in support is happening. And though here in Minnesota we have a relatively small number of anti-Semitic attacks or acts, the numbers are rising. And in Kentucky, right now, a candidate for the United States Senate is placing campaign signs on lawns that say, "With Jews, we lose." If these fears are real, then what is going too far? When does Ema, our deep anxiety, cloud our judgment? As challenging as these real threats are, we must be mindful of how different our world is in 2014. Consider these few examples. The largest pro-Israel demonstration this summer happened not in New York or in Toronto, but in a city without Jews, in Calcutta, where thousands of Hindus, Buddhists, and Sikhs affirmed Israel's right to exist. This summer in China, social media was reportedly overwhelmingly pro-Israel. A couple weeks ago, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and other prominent German political and religious leaders attended a rally in Berlin to express zero tolerance for anti-Semitism. Merkel said, "More than 500,000 Jews lived in Germany before the war, and only 30,000 survived. The fact that over 100,000 now live in Germany is a miracle." Among those gathered in support at the rally were thousands of Kurds, Syrian Christians, and Africans. And in Russia, there is now an annual Hanukkah party in the Kremlin. This is the same Kremlin that housed Stalin and a host of other famous anti-Semitic communist premiers and czars before the communists. Remember Fiddler on the Roof, which opened on Broadway exactly 50 years ago this week? It takes place in the Palace settlement during the reign of the czars. The poor Jews of Anatevka turn to the rabbi and ask, "Rabbi, is there a prayer for the czar?" And the rabbi strokes his little larger beard, thinks for a moment, and then responds altogether, "Yes, minor kind, there is a prayer for the czar. May God bless and keep the czar far away from us." Well, and now in the 21st century, in the lifetime of those very Russian Jews who fled the former Soviet Union because of its persecution of Judaism, the Kremlin is hosting Hanukkah parties. How do we cautiously look to the future with hope? Yes, the past repeats itself, but not in the same way. Realistic hope emerges from seeing how things are different. Our numbers are small as a people in this world, but we have unprecedented strength. The state of Israel, 66 years after its founding, despite real challenges now, is not the beleaguered military power of 1948. Among all Americans, Judaism is the number one most respected religion, according to Pew Studies. And the organized Jewish community enjoys access to the halls of power in this country far beyond our numbers. How do we repeat the past differently? We must appreciate our strength. We must be proud of our Judaism. We must support Israel and the beautiful, inspiring history of Zionism, along with its faults, as Ari Shavit reminded us so passionately this past March. We are not Israelis who must ultimately determine their own fate, but we are Jews and we are a family, and families support each other and speak the truth to each other. Our Jewish tradition nurtured in long centuries of powerlessness, visions of justice that inspire the world. Now in possession of power, against the backdrop of real threats that cannot be minimized, Israel must still find ways to protect itself, accept its faults, and test our visions of justice in real time. In Israel, our people's honor is at stake. If we respond well, it will be because we have learned to live without aimam, without a deep anxiety that is ungrounded, so that we can inspire hope. Yes, there are real threats in our world today. We must guard ourselves from them, trusting our pachad. The Talmud declares, during the time of the darkest night, act as if the morning has already come. Or as Albert Camus put it, in the midst of winter, I found within me an invincible summer. Or in the understanding of Musar, the ethical, spiritual, millennial tradition that we are exploring at Mount Zion this year, we counter fear with trust. We develop our capacity to trust the future even though we do not have all the facts, knowing that fear inhibits our better nature. Yirah. We are seen. We are seen by us, by God, and by the world. As we enter 5775, may our fears be calmed as our souls trust in the future with realistic hope. Amen.